Welcome back to another episode of The Last Zebra. I'm your host, Ugo Ezema. As always, please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment. Next guest, local New Orleans filmmaker, David Bush. Welcome to the show.
Dr. Ugo, thank you so much for having me. Glad to be here.
I appreciate you. Dr. Ugo makes me nervous. Ugo is fine.
Ugo, great.
Outside of the hospital, I forget I'm a doctor, so I try to think of myself as just a regular person.
That's fair.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Like you said, I'm a local filmmaker in New Orleans. I was born and raised in Baton Rouge.
Wow.
But now I work here primarily as a script supervisor and also as a screenwriter and director on films of all different sizes.
I have been exposed to the film industry through Matt, our mutual friend, and there's so much that I did not know. And one of the biggest things that I think about whenever I watch a movie, the end credits, I have so much more appreciation for all the different roles that it takes to get into a film. How did you get into the film industry?
I was obsessed with movies as a kid. I'm one of those like rare lucky people who knew when I was 6. I told my parents, who were both engineers, like, I want to make movies. And they said, he'll grow out of this. It won't be a problem. And then sometime in high school, they gave up and they realized that's what I was going to do.
Wow.
And it's funny, you talk about the crew. I grew up, I'm the DVD generation. I grew up watching, director commentary tracks on every movie I could find. But I remember for me, I was watching Jackie Brown, the Quentin Tarantino movie.
Yeah.
And there's this scene in it where Pam Grier and Robert Forster are just talking in a bar. And in the special features, there's this shot of the behind the scenes of making that scene. Mm-hmm. And in my head, this is 2 people talking at a bar. I wouldn't think you would need more than 5 or 6 crew members. This is 14-year-old, 15-year-old me. And in this picture, there's got to be 40 people standing around, all just behind camera. You could see half the room, and they're all on the other side. And I think that was, for me, the moment where it clicked. Like, oh, my God, there's so many people involved in this. Which was good news because it meant that I was, sure I could find a way to be one of them. So I insisted that I was going to pursue film. I got into a film school in Central Florida, UCF. Mm-hmm. I went to the film school there, and during a summer vacation, I was back home in Baton Rouge. The film industry had landed in Louisiana, courtesy of some tax incentives, and I lucked into an internship on this Samuel Jackson movie. Worked for free for one movie, worked for free for half of the next movie, and then got hired on. And I told my friends back in Orlando, I think I'm not going to come back for my senior year. I'm just going to stay here. I'm going to work, and hopefully I can find a way to finish my degree online. Fortunately, my professors, I think very excited that I actually had a job in film, were incredibly accommodating, so I was able to finish. And meanwhile, I worked my way into the industry, starting as a PA, which is the bottom of the totem pole.
What does that stand for?
A production assistant. They're the gophers. They are the ones getting the coffees. They're one of the biggest jobs they do is just keeping track of the actors, making sure everyone knows where they are when they need them, making sure that it's quiet when we're rolling, making sure that doors stay shut when they need to. It's a often thankless job, and it's so invaluable. And to this day, underpaid. Hopefully that changes. But I worked my way up from a PA to an AD, which is an assistant director. And essentially that's up the chain in the hierarchy of kind of set management. The top of that food chain is the first AD, first assistant director, who is effectively the floor manager of the set. They're in charge of scheduling, they're in charge of safety. They're often the ones calling, rolling and cut if the director just wants to be focused on the monitor. I did that for a little while in a variety of movies, many of them in Louisiana, some in Los Angeles. And then I transitioned into script supervising, which is in charge of continuity. So famously, when the coffee cup switches hands from one shot to another, or someone's all of a sudden in the wrong shirt, I'm watching out for that, but I'm also watching out to make sure the actors say the right words, make sure that the angles that we are getting are going to cut together into a cohesive movie. Essentially protect the editor and make sure that the editor gets enough footage that functions to convey the director's intent for the script onto the screen. And I transitioned into that because that job sits next to the director at the monitors, and they have headphones on. They're listening to everything the actors say. They're hearing what the directors are saying to the actors. And I wanted to be in that position because I was also writing. This entire time I'd been writing my own projects, just for fun, but also hoping that they would get made someday. And I wanted to be in a position that would give me the maximum access to learn how good directors do their jobs. And this was a great position for that. The kind of added upside is it put me right next to producers. Producers sit at those monitors too. And I was never actively selling myself. I've never been good at the like hustle of it. But if people asked, what do you want to do? I would tell them I write. And I would offer to read other things they had. Often they would ask if they could read my stuff. And I started getting jobs doing rewrites of some smaller films and then writing some stuff of my own. And at some point I got offered a directing job on a Lifetime movie. And since then I've directed a couple of projects of my own, some for Lifetime, others just totally independent. And I've continued to write for myself and for other people. And I still script supervise on larger projects, primarily in New Orleans, but still all over the place. So that's kind of the nutshell version.
There's so much to dive into that. I think, again, going back to all the different roles that it takes, you mentioned the 40 people behind the camera that are necessary to facilitate a scene of just two people having a conversation. When you first got that job, when Louisiana offered those incentives for the film industry, when you first got that job, what was that first day on set like for you?
Absolutely terrifying. I was coming in from, I'd been in film school for a couple of years, and I had this very, big, lofty view of, I understood, we'd been taught how set is supposed to run, in quotes, because it doesn't often run in this kind of idealized way. You're a doctor. I got to imagine it would be akin to you've been in medical school, but you've not actually, it's operated on a body. You've not had any hands-on experience. And all of a sudden, like you're in an OR and supposed to actually be a functioning part of this team. And to make it trickier for me, so my first job, I was a camera intern. And I knew very little about camera. And the movie, it was not, Samuel Jackson was in it, but it was not a huge movie. It was kind of small, and it was chaotic and underfunded. Obviously, they needed interns. And so the camera team I was with were stressed, and I don't think they realized that I had as little experience as I did. And so they did not really explain to me what they were expecting. They were just very frustrated when what they were expecting didn't happen. And it was definitely an adjustment period. I think this is commonly a culture shock for people coming out of film school in particular. I think there's this temptation to think, well, I wrote an award-winning short script or something. They're going to want me on this set. And really what they want on the set is someone who's just going to be quiet and pay attention and do one small job, well. And I think that's so very much the key to a set running well. It's 40 people. The problem with that many people is, a big machine moves slowly unless everyone really understands
their
role and how best to accommodate all the other roles. So it was terrifying.
Film school is something that I think the way I think about it is, and this is just as a complete outsider who's just imagining what film school is like. I imagine film school to be a bunch of plays, and in your class, the teacher presents a script and everybody acts out. What is wrong about my interpretation of what I think film school is like?
I think your interpretation of film school is an accurate interpretation of maybe a class in film school. So I think it's, from the outside, it probably feels a bit like, like Hogwarts, the Harry Potter school, where it's like there's a class on potions and there's the class on like transforming animals or whatever there is. So in film school, there tend to be a variety of courses. There's a lot of film theory. So talking about, famous films, why they work, what makes a film have the emotional effect it does, et cetera. There's a decent amount of film history. And on the practical side, most schools spend, there's courses on cinematography, so the visual elements of film. There's usually courses on editing. There's almost always a couple courses on screenwriting. Directing, in terms of primarily talking to actors, is another course. A huge frustration of mine is oftentimes the scenario you just described doesn't exist because usually film schools and acting schools tend to function separately from each other. Often when film students want to make their short films, they'll go to whatever acting school the college may have. But the two programs rarely overlap in terms of actual classes, which I think is a real shortcoming. So much of really high functioning film work is dependent on the crew understanding and having respect for the working minds of the cast, and also vice versa. And I think that's a big sticking point for a lot of people, is they just didn't learn how to do that. So, but within film school, there's a whole variety of courses on different specialties. Another shortcoming of many major film schools is they tend to not focus as much on the nitty-gritty technical side. There are trade schools. There's one called Full Sail in Orlando as well, which they focus on trade. They focus on the grips and electrics, who are the people moving around the equipment that facilitates camera or handles the lighting on the set. There's very little focus on that in most film schools, because I think most people entering film schools don't dream of working on the technical side. Right. Most people think, I'm going to be a director or a writer or a cinematographer or an editor. And that's about as far as a lot of people's aspirations go. But over the course, there's a tremendous amount of varied coursework. So even despite these limitations, I think there's at least an effort made to kind of diversify what people are learning about.
For the dream jobs in film, the directors, the actors, are there things that you learned in the process from a practical perspective that film school didn't teach you, or perhaps isn't even capable of teaching you?
Absolutely. I've talked to some high schools. I wouldn't say this to a college, obviously, but I typically discourage people from going to film school. If you're going to NYU or USC or AFI, there's a couple other really top tier schools, then sure, I absolutely encourage it. If you get in and you can afford it, by all means go. The biggest thing that those schools are going to afford you is just the network of the other students you're going to meet there. And not to mention, some of your professors are going to be really, Spike Lee teaches at NYU, and you have classes with like David O. Russell or whoever in USC. And that's obviously valuable. Other than that, I think you will learn more on the theory side and from just watching movies. Watch a lot of movies. We have YouTube now. Watch a lot of movies, a lot of YouTube. Watch director's commentary tracks. I think there's still value in DVDs and Blu-rays. In terms of the technical side, get on a set. I learned more in a week on set doing a position that I didn't love and was terrified of than I learned technically in all of film school. And which isn't to say I didn't have excellent professors. I certainly did. But it is such a hands-on job. I mean, it would be like somebody, for most people, the beginnings of their career are going to be doing just physical work, not necessarily physically grueling.
Right.
But the idea of somebody going to like a 4-year construction school, when I think you'd probably learn far more just being on a site, working with a foreman who understands, what to do. So to that end, there's certainly something to be gained in film school. And I would never discourage anyone from going to college. If someone is set on going to school, by all means go. I would suggest getting a peripheral degree, something that's going to
augment.
Absolutely. And one of the cool things about film is everything does. If you don't plan to go to college, I would recommend people, as soon as they can, find their way onto a set and start learning and growing there.
What is the easiest way to get on a set?
Bottom of the totem pole is always the easiest, as fair. Unfortunate as that is. So the way I did it was working as an intern, though I have some like moral qualms. The concept of being an intern is like fundamentally classist. I mean, in order to be able to be an intern, I was lucky that my parents lived in town and I could stay there. If I was supporting myself, I couldn't have done that.
Right.
I think the industry is becoming more cognizant of that, and I think is mostly doing away with unpaid internships. But a paid internship or failing that, a PA, when a big movie does a big action sequence, they always need a ton of PAs. I worked on 21 Jump Street as a PA. We had 60 or 70 PAs to lock up 8 straight city blocks of Poydras in downtown New Orleans.
Yeah. That was filmed here in New Orleans? I didn't know that.
Yeah, 21 was filmed here.
That's amazing.
When they need 60 PAs, it's not all going to be experienced people. That's a great way in. Like, show up, pay attention, be nice, and meet people, be friendly. And you get more jobs from that. The other way in is working as a background actor. Background actors or extras, as they're kind of more colloquially known, are people sort of frown at it. And it's true that there are certainly background actors that have kind of unrealistic expectations they're about to be discovered and become, like Henry Cavill or somebody. But it's also, it's a great spot. It's a great way to just be on set.
Yeah.
And again, you can't be there with the mentality of, I'm going to go meet the director and convince him to cast me, or I'm going to go meet the camera people and tell them I want to do you do have to pay attention, figure out and understand the flow of work. But I've seen locally plenty of background actors who were just really, helpful and hardworking and attentive. And then all of a sudden you see them in their PAing, or all of a sudden they're being a stand-in, which is kind of another job on set. It's the person who stands in the place of the actor for lighting purposes. Mm-hmm. And that job, you're talking closely with all of the on-set crew. And from there, it's not easy, but that's probably the best avenue towards springboarding up the ladder into kind of whatever department you're trying to pursue. The alternative, that's one approach, which is starting on bigger projects at the bottom of the ladder. The alternative is make your own content, put it on YouTube, put it on Vimeo, submit it to festivals, whatever you got to do. It's a total crapshoot. I mean, there's great work out there that doesn't get discovered, but if you make some really amazing stuff and it gets discovered, then that's how you kind of skip that chain of command. Someone says, hey, you made an amazing short film. Do you have a feature that you want to do? And if you've got one ready, maybe they give you a little bit of money. If that does well, they give you a little more money. So you start at the bottom on big projects or at the top on tiny projects. And either way, you're working your way up in one way or the other.
Right. What's more difficult, being the director or the person responsible for the script, so the script writer?
I guess that depends on what you mean by difficulty. I think the director has a lot more control and therefore a lot more responsibility. At the end of the day, if the movie's bad, the director's going to be blamed. If the movie's going over budget, the first people that the studio or whoever's financing it are going to look at is the director. The director is one of the hardest things about directing is you're managing, a dozen different departments, more than a dozen. And every one of those departments wants to do their craft to the best of their ability. But often budget and time will not allow that. And unfortunately, it kind of falls on the director to be the person who says to camera, I'm sorry, we have to go. I understand it's not lit exactly the way you want, but we need to go. Or to tell an actor, I know you want another take. You wanted something else different performance-wise. Trust me, that one was great. We got it. And it's saying that to any given department, which is always brutal. Like, that they, have your best interests in mind, but it's rough and it's limiting and it's a very high stress job. Writing, the hardest part of writing is just motivating yourself to actually do it. Provided you're writing something that you're going to, sell down the line or make down the line.
Right.
Honestly, the best thing for a writer is a contract or is a deadline, really, because then, that's the best motivation there is. There's a cutoff after which you're in trouble. Then for writing, the other big challenge is you have to know that you're seeing a movie in your head. At least for me, I'm kind of seeing a movie in my head that I'm constantly reshaping, and then I'm putting it on the page. But what's on the page is just a blueprint for that movie. And the way that somebody else turns that blueprint into, the house that is the movie might be radically different from the way I saw it. They might just take whole things. They might take elements that I thought were load-bearing and throw them out. Or they might throw out something, come back to me and say, hey, this doesn't work. And I want to say, well, yeah, because you threw away the thing that made it work. But they don't want to hear that. And so what you instead have to do is just kind of, patch it over as best you can. You're putting Band-Aids on it, which it's not physically difficult, obviously. For me, at least, it's not super high stress.
Right.
But you just have to be prepared to know this is never good. The odds of this being the thing I saw in my head are tiny. And if you reconcile with that, then I think it's actually not that difficult of a job. And honestly, sometimes it comes out better than the thing you saw in your head. That's the beauty of everyone else adding their art and talent to it. So they're both difficult, but in very different ways.
I saw a quote from George R.R. Martin. It was yesterday that I read it, where he was essentially lamenting the idea of a product, in this case books, that have essentially cult followings because of the content, the material, the way it was written, the way the characters are described and their motives and how the story flows. And he was lamenting how when that is transformed into a script and the process of making film out of these books essentially peels away from the original author's dream. And he was lamenting that. I imagine that's similar to what you're describing, right?
Yeah, I remember, I think it was Thomas Harris who wrote the Hannibal Lecter book, Silence of the Lambs, said that he never watched Silence of the Lambs, the movie, even though he heard it's brilliant and he supported them making it. But he said that if he watched it, then he couldn't write Hannibal Lecter anymore. He'd be writing Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter. So he wanted to keep his vision of it pure. What I think it also takes away, and I'm a big fan of adaptations. I've seen plenty of, there are books I love, and I love the movie versions too. But on the other side, it doesn't just kind of strip away from the writer's vision of it. What it also does is it reduces the participation of the person consuming it. So I think for most people, when they read a book, they're kind of making a movie of it themselves in their head. Yeah, you're reading words, and then you're doing this magic that translates those words into images, and you're hearing the voices of the characters. That's why I think so many people are frustrated when they see the movie version. It's not just they changed some words, it's just not the version they saw. Even if it was totally loyal, it just isn't right. Whereas movies, you certainly can be an active viewer in a movie, but you don't have to be. You can sit and you can just stare at the screen and take it all in, and you don't have to do much work. I mean, if it's a really lofty intellectual movie, maybe you have to do some figuring out of the plot. Maybe there's some emotional conflict to work through, but you don't have to do much work to turn it into an experience.
Right.
Whereas a book, you work at it, and that's, I think, what so much of the engagement with the book is. In movies, you necessarily lose that. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing.
Right. What's watching a movie like for you, or a TV show? What's that experience like? I'm always curious to see when the art form is what you participate in, and that is your profession. How do you interpret said art form? Are you just tired of movies? But you already said you love movies.
No, I still watch an absolutely absurd number of movies. I think it's probably akin to the way a chef or a real food enthusiast eats food. If it's really, really good, I'm not thinking about it. If it's really great, I'm just lost in it. Hopefully, if it's telling a story that's emotional and compelling, hopefully it's the same way. I hope I'm not thinking about Liam Hemsworth or whoever. I don't know why he came to mind. But I'm thinking about, whatever character that person's playing. And not the actor themselves. In the same way, if the story's really gripping and it's compelling, and it's really well made, my technical brain is kind of off, and I'm just watching it and experiencing it. That said, when that happens, I will be watching that movie again, probably more than once, because I want to, take it apart and deconstruct and see why it worked so well. If it's not great, even if it's just good, then I'm looking at it and I'm impressed. I'm like, oh, okay, that was I like how they did that. That makes sense. I'm not in the story, but I'm appreciating the craftsmanship. What's almost better than that is watching bad movies.
Wow.
There's something. So I think what Tarantino did, while David Fincher and Darren Aronofsky and all these guys were watching all the best movies they could find and learning everything they could from them, I feel like Tarantino was watching all the movies that everyone else dismissed as bad and taking all the best things from those, which is what makes his movies unique. And he's not at all shy about saying what he takes from which movies.
Right.
But it's all from these obscure projects. And I think even the worst movie is going to accidentally have something great in it.
Right.
There's an exercise. I think a lot of my best writing ideas come from, I'm watching a bad movie and there's a moment that's great. And I think I wish the rest of this movie wasn't so bad, because this moment is so good. What if instead of all this junk leading up to this, what if instead this great moment was the start of this movie, but then what could happen after that would make it, that would be satisfying, and make that a good start to a movie? And so then even though I'm watching this other movie still, I don't usually pause. My brain is just off exploring some other story. And then I can go back and go, ooh, now can I take out that one part that I would have had to steal because that's somebody else's and they've done that. Can I take that out and kind of reverse engineer a good plot? And I feel like that honestly happens. It's often when I finish watching a movie that just didn't do it for me, that's often when I want to go and like pull out my phone, hurry and scribble down some notes about an idea I want to explore and maybe write.
How many scripts, roughly, do you think you've written?
That is a big number. Okay, there's some caveats to this. Mm-hmm. It's between 60 and 70 right now. That includes full rewrites or major rewrites. I'd say more than 60% changed of other people's work that I was hired on to do. That also includes a few pilots. Mostly we're talking features, which are 90 to 110-ish pages long. Pilots could be anywhere from 30 to 60. It's between 60 and 70 with those things in mind. That said, of that 60 to 70, fewer than 12 or 15 have been shot or made in any capacity. So that's a 1 in 4 to 1 in 5 kind of ratio. Of the remaining ones, so that's another 40 or 50 scripts remaining, I would say 5 of them are good. I hope there's some good things in most of them, but in terms of scripts that I would, if I got trapped in an elevator with Steven Spielberg and he was like, I really want something to read, there's not more than 5 or 6 of my scripts that I wouldn't be embarrassed by and have to kind of, apologize in advance. Hey, just so you know, I'm not done with it. I'm working on it still. So yeah, it's big numbers. I'm very much of the mentality that like quantity breeds quality. Mm-hmm. That I remember there was this study. I don't remember who did it. A photography class. They told half the class, go out and take like 5 great photos. And they told the other half the class, go out and take 500 photos and then pick the 5 best ones. And all of the best photos came from the group that shot 500, right. Even though they were just pointing and shooting. It's just, you can't not sometimes get greatness if you're constantly creating things. Right. And you can't help but improve. I often, people will reach out, they've written their first script and they want to know, how do I get an agent, or who do I bring this to? Right. How do I get this made? And I'll read anything, but my answer is almost always, okay, great work. You wrote a script. That's huge. You ran your first marathon. You did not win because it was your first marathon. You're not going to win your first marathon. The thing to do is take it and put it in a drawer, and you'll write another one, and then another one, and another one. And when you've written like 5 more, go back and look at the first one. And if you still think it's ready, you won't. But if you do, then look at what to do with it. But in the meantime, you will have grown so much. You just got to keep, cranking them out.
I think about even this podcast, when every once in a while, not every once in a while, my wife thinks I obsess about this podcast. This is our 31st episode.
Oh, incredible.
It's one of my proudest things. 32nd episode. It's one of my proudest things from, in terms of creativity, something I've always wanted to do. And actually watching it and seeing it come out to fruition. The process of our first episode and how we've each episode kind of morphed into a, we tinker a little bit. We've changed this. We've done this. Matt will tell you the audio on the first one. I mean, I've waxed lyrically about his technical ability. Like he'll hear something and he's like, yeah, no, that doesn't sound right. I have no clue. But just cranking, I appreciate that because of the idea of just doing it, just doing the thing is in itself an act of self-betterment and self-fulfillment. Are there scripts that as you're writing them, you're like, nah, this isn't going the way I thought it would be, but I'll still finish, or I'm just going to stop?
I very rarely stop. I used to kind of a lot. The problem is once you start stopping, it's hard to stop stopping. It's really easy to, and making it 30 pages into a script, it doesn't really accomplish anything more than making it 25 pages into a script. I mean, pat yourself on the back, you've made it 5 pages farther, but you still don't have much to show for it. And honestly, so much of writing is rewriting, and so much of it is big and structural. That, like, getting to the end is really important. That said, the feeling that you just described of, because it takes so long to write, 90 pages, 100 pages is a big process. And being 35 pages in and knowing I don't know where this is going, or this isn't working the way I wanted, and it's not going to be any good, and then slogging on anyway is so depressing and so demoralizing. So what I do now is I pre-write quite a lot. So I ponder a lot before I ever start. I have a big board in my home office, and I literally have little cards, and I stick them on there with magnets, and I'm moving things around. It's a lot easier to write down a couple words on a card and then go, no, it's a dumb idea, and tear it up and throw it away, than it is to write 1,000 words worth of 2 scenes and then have to scrap it. Then you don't want to scrap it because you're committed to it, so you keep it even though it's not good. I'd much rather spend that time when the stakes feel low, all the ideas are disposable. So I do this thing, I make this whole board. I'll write out an outline. It's usually very thorough now. If it's something just for me, I'll take my time with it. If it's on a deadline, I'm gonna set aside, however, let's say a quarter of the writing time, I'm gonna set aside to just doing that. And I'm gonna, there's this idea that like creativity is the confluence of divergent thinking and convergent thinking. So divergent thinking being, just brainstorming, super creativity. You see this in a lot of like abstract artists and surrealists. It's just crazy ideas. They don't need to make sense. Divergent thinking. A lot of people are great at that. And then there's other people who are great at convergent thinking, which is like, okay, you've given me 10 tools. Now I'm going to figure out how to make the little machine that I need to make. And really, a lot of the best creative work is the combination of these two things. So I kind of like to differentiate it a bit and take, let's say a quarter of the time, just think divergently, throw darts at a giant wall and just see whatever ideas come up. Really nothing's off limits. Then convergent thinking, take it, organize it into a structure that I think is going to work, that I think really tells the story I want to tell. A lot of it's going to get thrown away, but again, there's no value in it yet. It doesn't feel like killing a baby to get rid of it. Once I've done that, I pretty much know this script is going to work. I don't necessarily know that the end product's going to be good, or it might require a lot of reworking once it's in script form, but I've got like a detailed roadmap to get from A to B, so I can be pretty confident I'm not going to get lost on the way. The gas tank is full. I'm not going to have to walk the last 2/3. And then hopefully I avoid that horrible feeling of just wanting to give up, but feeling like I've it's like throwing good money after bad.
So even for you, even the idea process is a quantity process. So putting a bunch of things up out there, and then taking the 5 pictures, the 5 quality pictures out, and putting that together. So even in that, before you even do the hard part, even the divergent part is a quantity thing. You're just like, put all this out there, see what fits, put the little bit that fits into the quality.
Absolutely. I mean, I've heard the analogy, and I think it's an excellent one, is the like giant block of marble, and then you carve the statue David out of it. Yeah. It's like you still needed all the yes, the rest of the stone in the block of marble is not in the final statue. It's gone. It got thrown away. But David, you could never have made the statue without all that stone being there in the first place. Or for a more like filmic comparison, a documentary. A documentary is 90 minutes long, but they got to shoot a lot more than 90 minutes. I mean, you think about reality TV, they're shooting 100 hours of footage for each 60-minute or however 45-minute episode. Most of it is gone. Was it a mistake to shoot all that footage? No, because they never could have gotten all those great clips if they hadn't filmed all that stuff first. And though this differs a little bit because it's creative, it's all being brought out of nothing. I think that analogy still holds. Like for me, at least, I'm sure there are people out there who are just sort of a savant and are able to just see it all in their head first, as like all a piece of a whole, and just go for it. I envy those people, but I think for the mortals among us, it's you gotta just come up with everything, then throw away the bad stuff, and then everyone thinks you're great because they think they don't see all the bad stuff. That's the other kind of safety net.
Do you have a list of favorite movies? I'm sure you do.
I am such a list person. It varies massively. Sometimes, like other people, like there's a top 10. I've got a Word doc that's like my top 500. And of course it changes. Some of the ones for me that are up there, some of the ones that I am impressed by how technically tight they are, especially on a writing level, incredibly complex, but really smart and economical. The Prestige, Christopher Nolan's film, is a masterpiece.
I think that movie is grossly underappreciated.
It is.
First of all, Christopher Nolan is my favorite director.
He's absolutely brilliant.
The man, he gets it. I love that a lot of his works aren't adaptations essentially, except obviously the Batman
movies, yeah.
But he does. I love how original you walk into a Christopher Nolan experience, because that's really what it is. It feels like something you hadn't experienced before.
Yeah, and he is so impressive on so many levels. He's an incredibly intelligent filmmaker. He is not shy about being really, really smart. I mean, his movies they are intellectually challenging.
Yeah.
Just even like Dunkirk, the structuring is so complex and challenging in a way that I think forces audiences to kind of think harder, which is a moral message that everyone should have. It's just like, I wish if everyone thought harder, we'd be so much better off. But then beyond that, he's so technically excellent. Yeah. He gets great performances. By the way, The Prestige is an adaptation. It's based on a novel. I'm not going to say the novel is bad, but I will say that what Christopher Nolan and his brother, Jonathan Nolan co-wrote it, what they brought to it is insane. I mean, that movie compared to that book is just, you read the book and you're like, okay, this could be an entertaining kind of silly movie.
Yeah.
And then they turned it into something so brilliant. I love movies that are just very, sharp technically and very tight and economical. And then there are these movies that I kind of love them because I don't understand them. Like I can't quite reverse engineer them. One of my favorite movies of all time, and I take heat for this, is there's this movie called Cloud Atlas. Have you seen it?
Oh, Cloud Atlas with, don't tell me, Halle Berry, what's his name? Tom Hanks. And I've seen the movie. Essentially, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's a progression through a millennia, essentially, of the same characters.
Sort of. Yeah, it's this just sprawling thing. I mean, it's got these 6 stories. They're all cut together. I think it's an incredibly challenging movie. And when I saw the trailer for it, it was a 6-minute trailer. It was crazy. It was, from the people who did The Matrix. And I watched the trailer and I saw that it was based on a Man Booker nominated novel by David Mitchell, who is a genius. And I'd never read any of his stuff. I looked up the book. I bought a copy of it. I read it. It's a really tough read, but so rewarding. And again, structurally really interesting. The structure is very different from the movie. I was blown away by the book. It's probably my favorite fiction book I've ever read. And I thought, these people are insane. There's no way this could be a good movie. I'm going to go see it because I'm curious, but it will be bad. They've made a huge mistake. And I went and saw that movie, I think on opening night. And I was blown away. I think the trouble a lot of people have with it as a movie, especially if they have not read the book, is because it's these 6 stories and they're just totally intercut in a way that seems random, but is in fact incredibly precise. There's this temptation to want to solve it. There's this temptation to say like, ooh, I'm going to figure out how the 6 stories connect. And like, there's all these things that feel like clues. And you think, I'm going to treat this like Sherlock Holmes and I'm going to learn the solution. But there isn't a solution. It's not a mystery. And what I tell people before they see it is like, just don't try that hard. Just treat it like it's 6 stories that happen to be cut together. And the emotional resonances and the thematic, complexity will come through. Or I tell people, read the book first. It's a huge step. But that one, I mean, I look at that and I could never. Prestige, I like to hope that someday I'll be talented enough. Now, given Jonathan Nolan was probably 28 or something when he wrote it, which is insane. But Cloud Atlas, and there's other ones. Magnolia is a Tom Cruise movie, which I don't know why that movie's so good. I don't understand why I find it as impactful as I do. But I think it's just absolutely riveting.
A lot of movies, and we mentioned Quentin Tarantino. like you said, he's not shy about hinting at his influences. Have you been able to manifest some of your own influences into your own work?
I think so. I don't know that it's on as, minute of a level as Tarantino will, see a shot he loves and he will recreate that shot.
Yep.
I can't think of a time I've done that exactly. I do think there are ways that you just sort of incept concepts and like ways that people do things. I think a lot of, Aaron Sorkin dialogue. Aaron's, it's that staccato pacing.
So tight.
Oh, it's amazing.
So tight.
And it's got that like rhythm to it. Mm-hmm. I hope that I'm a big fan of like clever wordplay to a fault, honestly. I'm such a pun enthusiast. And I think a lot of that comes from just really watching movies that are into the quick, witty banter and just absorbing what those rhythms are. I know Sorkin said he learned, I think his parents were big theater people. Mm-hmm. Like they worked in theater and he spent a lot of time backstage. Mm-hmm. He couldn't see it. He was just hearing the dialogue and he kind of picked up the rhythm. I think it's that. It's, learning those processes. Something from Nolan, which in Memento and his first movie, Following, he does really well is he'll show you these images and you don't understand their meaning. And then he doesn't signpost it. He doesn't say like a Sherlock Holmes movie. You don't just like zoom in ominously on a map in the background. Right. No, he just shows you something out of context and you don't know what it is. And then later in the movie, it's going to come back. I absolutely love that technique. It's kind of this, I think to me, some of my favorite movies are movies that present, which is funny because I just, criticize people for looking at Cloud Atlas this way.
Yeah.
I really like movies that present a riddle. And in fact, I tell a lot of aspiring writers when I read their scripts, one of my biggest criticisms is the only reason we have a million options now. We've got a million streaming platforms. We can go to any movie anytime. We no longer have to walk or drive to Blockbuster and return the cassette. Right. It's very easy to not finish a movie. And same thing with a script or a book. I can put it down right away. So what I tell people is what you gotta do immediately is ask me a question or make me ask a question. Something, whatever your very first image is, have it, I need an answer. I need it, whatever that image is, I need an answer to it. So now I have to keep watching. Right, and then the entire movie is just a series of question and answer. Sometimes you can't just ask a million questions and never answer any of them because then I get angry. I don't trust you. You got to ask me a question, ask me another question, then answer the first one. Now ask me a third one, ask me a fourth one, answer the second one, ask me a fifth one. And the biggest question is going to take me from the first second of the movie to the last frame. Mm-hmm. And then there's, big ones that will be like character arcs from the beginning to the end of Act 2. But then even tiny little, even within a scene, starting on a gun on a table, I immediately want to know, whose gun is that? Is that going to get picked up? Who's going to do it? So I love a movie that just presents a riddle, which The Prestige is a phenomenal. The opening shot of that movie is the hats on the hill. Yep. And which is it's an interesting image, it's visual, and it literally is a spoiler. Right. But not in a way that you could ever figure out until you've watched the movie. And I've absolutely, I hope, picked up that kind of impetus to plant lots of, little setups throughout.
I don't know if this is true, but I imagine writing a book is different from script writing. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to write a book. I imagine writing, you just write anyway, and a book falls in there somewhere. That's my natural guess. Would that be a correct assumption? Sort of. I would say writing a book is far harder than writing a screenplay in one big way, and it's far easier in another. The harder part of writing a book is at minimum, it's going to be 4 times as long. We're talking a screenplay is 20,000 words, a book is going to be 80,000. Right. That's a huge difference. Also, if a screenplay is a blueprint, a book is a house. With the screenplay, a million other people's talent is going to go in and make it amazing. Mm-hmm. If your description of the, forest isn't that great, okay, well, there's going to be a locations department's going to find a great forest, and art department is going to come in and make it look amazing. They are all going to make you look like a genius, hopefully. With a book, you've got the reader filling in the gaps, but if something's not there, it's not there. Right. And if something there isn't good,
the art department person who's brilliant at, murals isn't going to fix it for you. It's just going to be not great because you wrote it that way.
That's a great point.
So, also in a screenplay, if the grammar, you should strive to have good grammar and strive to, not have typos. But if you do, it's okay. No one sees the screenplay. In a book, everyone sees it. Hopefully you have an editor who's handling it. On the flip side, what's far easier about a book, especially now in the era of self-publishing, is the amount of people that need to like your book in order for it to get made and get out there where anyone can see it is, literally now it's just one, it's you.
Right.
If it's more professional, then it's 2 or 3. It's a publisher and an editor need to see the appeal. A screenplay, if one of the just powerhouses of cinema reads it and loves it, then sure, you're off to the races. But otherwise, that document has got to entice a lot of people. It's got to make its way through assistants that are going to read it. It's whatever the gatekeepers are. Producers have to like it. They have to be able to present it to their bosses. The actors that they want to sign on are going to come on. They might or might not like it. You're going to get a million notes. It's this thing we were talking about earlier. If someone might say, I love it, but what if instead it's set in space? And then you go, okay, let me figure out how to make that work. At the book, again, at the high levels, sure, you might have an editor or publisher that's coming to you with big notes like that.
Right.
But there's ways to get it out there. With a screenplay, you've got a lot of people to satisfy for it to ever see the light of day because it just costs so much to make.
Right. What's a screenplay that what's your one that you've written that you are most proud of?
Oh, man. Okay, I'll give 2 answers to that.
Even better.
I wrote this incredible... I just finished directing my first movie, my first feature for Lifetime. And I'd done some rewrites on that script, but at the end of the day, Lifetime knows their audience very, very well. And they know that their audience want a very specific kind of movie, and I mean very specific. So your latitude to play and be creative within Lifetime it's not a big playground. There's things you can do within that playground, but it's limited for sure. And in the post process of just editing it, I had some real frustrations with the process, with one kind of middle person throughout, and it was just a really frustrating process. And I was annoyed, and I was disheartened. It was my first movie, and I just was in kind of a frustrated headspace. So I wrote this very bizarre movie. Based a little bit on Catcher in the Rye, just not the plot at all, but just like kind of the angsty sentiment. And I knew that I wanted to be able to make this movie myself, which meant I had to be able to fund it myself. And I am not, again, like the hustle thing is not me. Raising money is the worst. So it's like, I need to be able to make this movie for the money in my bank account, and that's it. So it's got to be micro budget. So I wrote this incredibly bizarre, pseudo documentary, shot on iPhone, written to be shot on iPhones. And at the time, this wasn't being done yet. I think right after we wrapped, Steven Soderbergh announced that he was doing, High Flying Bird or Unsane. Tangerine was another iPhone movie that had come out, I think that year. But and we shot this thing, and the script was so complicated. It was, it's a mockumentary, but then midway through it just completely changes. All of your expectations get thrown out. Character names are changing. It was such a complicated mess of a script that it was insane of me to think that it would work. And we did it. We shot the movie. It is out there. It has not been a hit by any means, nor was it ever going to be. But I'm very proud of how tricky that puzzle was, and then the fact that it translated to screen.
What's the name?
The movie is called Phony, which is again, it's the pun thing. We shot on iPhones, and it's also the call out to Catcher in the Rye. Phony. It's out there. It's on Amazon and everywhere else. But so that's one. And then the other I would say, and it's funny because I was literally tinkering with it again today. But it's sort of like a comedic. It's a dramedy. I'm going to be vague about the actual plot, but it's sort of like if Rain Man met Little Miss Sunshine. Wow, is kind of the vibe. And what I love about it is it's very silly and very light, but when it hits, I think it emotionally hits really hard. So it's one of these things. I like the idea of kind of Trojan horsing big ideas into people's brains by packaging it as something that looks, fun and silly. And it is fun and silly, but you didn't expect that you were about to be, kind of like slapped around emotionally and really forced to confront some complicated questions.
A film that comes to mind immediately. I consider myself a cinephile as well. As a side, my 3 favorite aspects of film are, I love cinematography. Love it, love it, love it, love it. I love dialogue. And I love a tight script, right? So a good, something that is keeping you engaged. Because you can have films that aren't action. They could be any genre.
Sure.
But you are engaged the entire time. So that's what I would call a tight script. And
absolutely.
I don't know if that's even accurate. But Aaron Sorkin, The Newsroom. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
I've not seen The Newsroom. I've not seen The Newsroom. I've not seen West Wing.
West Wing.
I know.
Oh my goodness. Like you mentioned the way he writes his dialogue. It was something that I immediately picked up on. Is like, oh, this is his style. This is like, dialogue is his thing. Like he purposely writes his characters' banter to be this engaging. His characters are always smart.
Yeah.
He always has smart characters. I would make the case that his characters are smarter than their position often.
Agreed. And they're clever.
They're clever.
They're clever in a way that most people are not that clever.
Exactly. You will not, there is no assortment in real life of Aaron Sorkin characters that are in the same space. That does not exist.
And it would be insufferable. It would be exhausting.
It would be absolutely exhausted.
Yeah.
But you were describing Rain Man and Little Miss Sunshine and the Trojan Horse packaging. Big Fish. You ever seen that movie?
Okay, you're not going to believe me. I rewatched that movie 2 days ago.
No way.
2 days ago, I rewatched Big Fish.
It's a guilty pleasure movie for me. I think that movie is so good.
Well, because at the end, when he's walking, and this is not a spoiler. You know from the beginning of the movie what's going to happen.
Right.
But like as it's finally happening, it is so emotional. Like also, what a beautiful arc that the son goes on in that movie, and it is so silly. It's so goofy, and like it's fine. I was rewatching it because I'm the project I'm working on right now is adapting a memoir basically, and in it there's a lot of sequences where we're very ambiguous about whether it's fantasy or not.
Oh, I love it.
And so I've been watching a couple of movies that kind of lean into Life of Pi is another one. These movies that most of the movie is comprised of stories, and Big Fish, of course, is a fantastic one, and it's one that it could have been so bad. That movie could be so. I mean, John August is the screenwriter who wrote that. Who, by the way, I don't know if you're familiar with him.
No.
So John August wrote Big Fish. He's written a lot of other Tim Burton movies. Recently, I think he wrote the Aladdin reboot that Guy Ritchie did.
Oh, wow.
But also he co-hosts an incredible screenwriting podcast for I think 12 years now.
Wow.
With Craig Mazin, who created Last of Us and Chernobyl.
So The Last of Us, the TV show.
The TV show, yes.
Which fantastic show. And Chernobyl too.
It's amazing. So yeah, Craig Mazin and John August have been had this podcast. I think they're 700 episodes in or something crazy. And they, in terms of just like the granular look at screenwriting and how it works, that podcast is one of the best. I mean, it's better than, again, no disrespect to the screenwriting teachers I had who were excellent. That podcast is top notch.
Would you ever have you actually gotten the chance to, aside from Phony, have you had the chance to, from conception, control a script into directorship?
Yes, to my detriment sometimes. So I've directed 6 features.
Okay.
2 of them are Lifetime originals, both of which I was hired on. There was already a script. I did a substantial rewrite, but at the end of the day, it's more the original writer's script, I would say, than it is mine. My other 4 have all been from original scripts of mine. 3 were completely original. 1 was an adaptation of a novella that a friend wrote. Phony aside, of the other 3, none of which are out yet. All 3 of these were shot back to back to back, and I think now have a distributor, but I don't know enough information. I am not on the producing side of things. I don't
even know how that works.
I don't really understand how it all works. Like kudos to producers. They are unicorns at finding money and putting together the people. And I've been very lucky to have encountered several really great ones.
Yes.
So of these three, one is an adaptation of a friend's novella. I'm incredibly proud of that script. I changed a lot in his novella. The novella is called The Bunker. It's by a guy named Garrett Moe. He self-published this thing. I read it before he put it out, and I thought, this is awesome. I would love to play with this. And he was wonderfully generous in letting me change things and make it my own. There was one of these three scripts which I was very proud of. It was one I gestated in me for a long time. And in fact, a very big producer who's a friend had asked for, if I had anything that could be shot for under $1 million in Mississippi. And I said, yeah, I do. I have this script. And I sent it over, and he passed it off to the reader at this company who reads everything. And this reader, he shredded it. He was so cruel. He was brutal to the script, and he was brutal like me. Like the notes on this thing weren't just criticizing the script. They were like, clearly, the person who wrote this script is lacking in empathy, or just like, it was brutal. So I read these notes, and my attitude was, I hate this person, and I'm going to ignore everything they said because they're the devil. A little while later, another producer friend, a lower budget level, says, hey, what do you have? We got to do 3 projects back to back. I said, great, here's 3 scripts. This one that had been shredded was one of them. And we launched into production on these back-to-back movies. The middle one was the one that this, I think, horrible person had torn apart. And we get to shooting it, and I realize he was right about almost everything about the script. About me, I hope he was wrong, but about the script, my God, had I just listened to him, I could have made this thing so much better. And instead, we were trying to fix it on set. We tried to fix it in post. The movie isn't horrible. A lot of other people contributed great things to it. I wish that guy had been less rude. I wish I had ignored the rudeness and seen all the value he was bringing me. Which, funny enough, to go on a slight tangent, I fairly recently wrote a script. It's a true story. It's a historical story. And it is it's sensitive. Like it is dealing with some controversial things and some things that, like, if done wrong, could be just really offensive and send the wrong message. And I wrote this thing, and I was immediately had some people who were, closer to the subject matter than I am read it and give feedback, which was wonderful. And then I reached out to the producer who passed my other script to this guy that shredded it. And I said, hey, is there any way I could get that person's contact info? Because I want them to read this. And I sent the script, and they said, yeah, absolutely. And I sent the script over to them with a different name on the title page. I didn't put my name on it because I, just hate this person. And their feedback was so positive and so glowing. And I was like, okay, good. I know that, like, if there were problems here, this person would have found them and would not have been shy. And I've since spoken to this person, and I actually really like this person. And now, like, when I've got a script, I mean, the thing I was just talking about that I'm really proud of, it's this kind of Little Miss Sunshine kind of vibe. It deals a lot with mental illness. There's a character in it that's got fairly severe dementia. And it deals with homophobia. There are some, like, just overtly racially insensitive elements to it, or to characters in it. And again, I reached out to this guy, and I was like, and now we've talked. And I was like, look, tear it apart. Like, please be brutal. I want to hear it from you rather than embarrass myself, or worse, like, do harm to any of these various issues that I really care about. So sorry, that was a very long-winded digression from, like, yeah, I have been able to take some stuff all the way through, and sometimes it's worked out great, and I'm very proud of it. And sometimes it's been a wonderful learning experience.
What is it about, especially for the one that this guy shredded? What was it about the actual act of putting it on film that made you realize, oh, wait, he was right? What was the process of actually trying to produce it? What was it about that process that made you realize, oh, man, he was right?
I think it's just something about, like, seeing it become concrete, seeing actual people. And we had really good actors on this project, really good. And seeing them really struggle to make things make sense kind of wakes you up to the fact that, like, ooh, this was not all there. And even before you get there, just looking at the pages, and because it was in the middle of two other projects, it got not enough pre-production attention from me or from anyone else. That's not true. Some people did an amazing job. But the day before you're going to shoot a scene, I would sit there and look at the scene and just know, oh man, like one of the actors who is a very talented actor, but he and I butted heads a little bit. And this is another person who was just not shy about being just really, straightforward about things he did not like. And looking at the pages the day before, I'm like, oh no, like he is gonna criticize this. He's gonna make fun of me for expecting him to say this. And what's worse is he's not gonna be wrong. Just like realizing that, like, yeah, the vision of it in my head, again, it was scenes that I liked, but they just weren't there in service of, they didn't work in the bigger context of the movie. Like the emotional through lines weren't there. So unfortunately, it did not measure up to what my hopes and dreams had been years before when I'd first had that concept.
I think about The Watchmen by Zack Snyder.
Yeah.
Speaking of cinematography, that's his thing. He got it.
Yeah, astonishing.
Astonishing. He's very creative, bright, vivid, and that's the best way I can explain it. But in context of the source material for The Watchmen, and this is a spoiler, the reason why the people turned on Dr. Manhattan, because there was an octopus, a space octopus, but he recognized, and I'm not sure if he was also the screenwriter in this particular project.
I think he co-wrote it. I know that Alan Moore had nothing to do with it.
Right. But aside from that little change, he was very precise about everything else, almost shot for shot.
Yeah.
From the comic panel to the screen, brilliant. But he recognized that the squid or the octopus would not translate into film, and he changed it into the proton bomb.
Which I think works really well.
Which I think works excellently.
It worked really
excellently.
well.
If you watch that movie and you've never seen the comic, you would not know the difference. Everything else still kind of flows and it makes sense. I would make the case that it probably makes more sense in a real world.
I completely agree.
than the original work. And so I in terms of, I was wondering was he unset when he was like, oh no, this doesn't work. But you just kind of explained the pre-production part. People are kind of breaking these things down and like, well, maybe this wouldn't work or this doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I imagine in that case, they probably talked about it early on. I feel like that happens quite a bit with adapted material. I mean, right, you look at it with Game of Thrones. It's a great example. Yeah. I mean, not even just plot stuff, but just, looking at the age of some of the characters. In the book, I think Khaleesi is like 13 or something. Right. And someone in pre-production said, we're not having, like, whether or not there's nudity, we're not going to have, a graphically sexual storyline, whether we're seeing it or not with a 13-year-old.
That's right.
That on the page, it's more, you can stomach it, and like it's not real. It's not the world that we live in. On screen, that's a human actress, and like it just doesn't work. So you got to make changes. Right.
And it, like you said, with the age thing, it's, if you read it, something about seeing it makes it makes it more real, right? So it makes it more palpable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have a genre that you appreciate more than others?
Good science fiction I love. Like, and again, I think part of it is it's so often a genre that allows for clever, not just in dialogue, but in terms of plotting too. It allows for really tricky, like complex conceits. It also allows for a safe distance from which to look at social issues or logical issues or moral issues without it being too in your face, without it being too politicized necessarily, or without it being too hotly politicized. Right. It sort of gives you a distance that allows you to just look at moral concepts with a step back.
Right.
Not to mention just the sheer creativity. And again, like this is like my OCD brain. I love the convergence of really outside the box creativity, but then grounded in a way that makes it still accessible to the real world. So yeah, science fiction for me often gets me. Beyond that, like really clever crime stuff. Talking about like earlier, really like witty, tight, bantery movies that pack an emotional punch. Martin McDonagh in Bruges is a masterpiece. Like it's
with Colin
incredible.
Farrell. Yeah.
Yes.
It's a brilliant movie.
It's so good. It's so smart.
Brilliant movie.
And there's a movie that like rewards a million rewatches. There's so much packed into it.
I find that Guy Ritchie kind of follows the In Bruges kind of tree of how he makes his movies in terms of dialogue. I love Guy Ritchie's works too. Gentleman is one of the movies that he just made out that not just made, but one of his more recent movies that I really, really enjoy. He definitely leans into local jargon.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it makes it you don't have to be from wherever. It's almost always in England, but you don't have to be from there for it to still pack the punch. The Sherlock Holmes movies I really, really enjoy.
It's so funny. I heard someone joke recently that like the way that America experiences England is basically it's all like Guy Ritchie's super witty England that's full of guns. It's this weird England where there's lots of guns, which is not the real England at all.
Right.
Or it's what's his name? The guy that did he's a writer, but he did Love Actually and Four Weddings and a Funeral what is his name? That's gonna kill me. But he's incredible. He did this movie Yesterday, which is the Beatles movie. And all of his movies are like this very like warm, glib, sort of like cheeky, like Hugh Grant England. And that's the two versions of England that America knows, because that's basically how we see England, which I think is hilarious.
Yeah, I love it. That's absolutely correct. I don't think there's another version out there in terms of mass or pop culture.
Yeah. And when we see England and stuff, but I mean, I guess there's like Bridgerton or something. But like,
I'm trying to remember which Guy Ritchie. My favorite Guy Ritchie movie is. I'm guessing you're gonna say Snatch. Yeah, there we go.
Snatch. Fantastic movie.
Fantastic movie. Tight. Mystery. His trademark slow motion, fast motion, like when he's just like rushing through a scene. I love it. I also love trademarks and being able to identify trademarks for a director or a writer.
That's something that's I think really tricky, and I think actors struggle with it a bit too. Is there's the two kinds of actor. There's the actor that like Tom Cruise is Tom Cruise.
Right.
Tom Cruise is always Tom Cruise, and yes, Magnolia is a little different, and Interview with the Vampire is a little different, but basically Tom Cruise plays Tom Cruise.
Right.
He's great at it. He's a phenomenal actor technically, but you are never not seeing Tom Cruise.
That's right.
And then there's Johnny Depp, who is, all sorts of different, or Christian Bale is, or Gary Oldman. These people are a different thing in every movie. For actresses, I mean, there's Melissa McCarthy, who's always Melissa McCarthy. There's some range for sure. I mean, she's been Oscar nominated at least once, I think maybe twice now. Yeah. Or on the other end of the spectrum, there's like Andrea Riseborough, who is amazing, and most people can't name 5 movies she's in, but they've seen 20. She's just different in every movie. There's this trickiness with writing and with directing of you want to be versatile and you want to be able to, like, you look at Picasso, could use every medium there is. You want to be able to do that, but at the same time, there's this conflicting interest of also wanting to have your signature. I mean, you look at like Guillermo del Toro or Wes Anderson, Tarantino, Christopher Nolan, like Denis Villeneuve. You can watch 2 frames of their movie and you know whose it is immediately.
Right.
And that's amazing. But, and this is something I struggle with, like I love the versatility of somebody like Ron Howard, who has done a dozen amazing movies. Stephen Frears is another like incredible one. Rob Reiner. Like these guys, I find that amazing. It's tricky. It's tricky to try and figure out whether you want to have like a signature or be a jack of all trades. Just an interesting. I think novelists have the same thing. You see this. I mean, that's why J.K. Rowling used a different name to write her mystery novels.
Right.
But
in terms of signature, James Patterson. In terms of novels, you know what you're getting with him.
But he is a machine.
Oh my goodness. He's 600
like,
novels I saw somewhere.
Factory.
Something ridiculous.
Unbelievable.
Daniel Day-Lewis is one of those. I'm convinced I don't know what he really looks like.
Sure. Like if you saw him in the street,
he could walk right past me.
Right.
And I would not recognize
you might
him.
say, oh, he looks like he could be a Daniel Day-Lewis character.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's
exactly. And I used to use him as my example of what a good performance is.
Sure.
Where if I remember the character and not the actor,
yeah,
I grade that as an excellent performance. But I realized that's not fair to the actors who, like the Samuel L. Jackson. At some point, he just became Samuel L. Jackson.
True.
Tom Cruise. At some point, even Denzel Washington. At this point, you never remember the name of Denzel's character.
True.
It's Denzel. You know, like these actors. But then I think those are it's probably a natural cycle to people that are consistent.
Sure.
In such a way that their presence becomes the character.
Yeah, and I think once you get to a certain point, it's just the celebrity.
Right.
They become a celebrity even in front of being an actor.
Right.
And whether or not they want it.
Right.
And yeah, all those guys that you can't. They're such icons now.
What are some features that you look for in an actor that you're like, they have it?
Okay, I think. Okay, and this is my sort of is a bizarre thing because like you watch a performance, it's amazing. Like the person knew all the words, but you just don't quite see it. And people talk about what this it thing is. My theory is that it's 100% eyes. It's not 100%. That's unfair. I would say 90% eyes. I think that. Okay, so there is research showing that like your pupils contract and dilate. Mm-hmm. When you think about more complex problems or when you experience deep emotion, right? That is very difficult to control. It's been proven that, you can force your pupils to contract by like thinking about the sun if you're focused on something and I forget which way it is, whether it's they contract when you're thinking about something complicated or dilate when you think about something complicated. I want to say it's dilate, which would make sense because you want more visual range. As your brain is distracted, you want to be able to, notice a predator coming at you.
Right.
I think what's happening in actors who are just like, wow, like something's going on, is I think it's the eyes are convincing us on a level that I don't know is truly learnable. And I think two actors that to me like epitomize this, Ryan Gosling, who when he's not doing like giant, whatever he's doing now, and when he's not Ken in Barbie.
Right.
But when, Ryan Gosling in Drive and a bunch of other movies. Ryan Gosling, half of his acting is he just sits there and stares at things with nothing happening on his face, and yet you see someone. And Daniel Kaluuya does the exact same thing. He just tilts his head slightly down, but he does the same thing. He just sits and he stares at stuff. And it's riveting. And I think... I don't think that either of those guys are lazy actors. I think they're both amazingly talented. I think there is something that like we are subconsciously getting on the level of their eyes that just sells it.
One of the more recent non-Barbie movies with
Gosling?
Gosling, The Gray Man on Netflix.
Yeah.
Because there's certain, this is the thing about him is he can actually play almost any character.
Yeah.
The fact that he can play Ken and, Gray Man and La La Land is, I think it's underrated.
Yeah, I find him annoyingly talented. He's so good at everything.
It's annoying.
Yeah, I mean, Andy's good looking. It's like this guy like won the lottery.
And he sings.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I know he was like a child. So he's been working at this since he was like 8 or something.
Wasn't he? I think he's a Disney kid.
He was. There's some great videos out there of him doing these dance routines when he was a child. And you're like, man, that's where I messed up. I should have done that.
that's the bottom you should have started
at. Exactly.
Well, I appreciate you so much for coming through. This was enlightening.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been a blast.
Absolutely. I'm hoping to any projects that we can, potentially look forward to.
Sure. I've got 3 movies that should hopefully be coming out. Where? I'm not sure yet, but soon. They're called Viridian and Half-Lives and They Whisper. And I'll leave it to anyone who watches all 3 to figure out which one I think is the bad one. Also, my movie Phony is out there. It's on Amazon. In the script supervising world, I just script supervised the movie Spinal Tap 2 with Rob Reiner, which is a sequel to the original 40 years ago. All the original guys are back. That is a bonkers, crazy movie. So yeah, that should be out soon. Otherwise, got some writing stuff in the works, but nothing I don't want to count my chickens before they hatch and announce anything yet. But I do now have a website, which has got a newsletter, and that's just davidxbush.com. And yeah, I send out like a quarterly newsletter, which is a little bit of self-promotion and a lot of just recommending, books I found that are interesting, or like productivity habits or gadgets that I find super useful. So that is probably the best place to get updates on whatever I'm up to.
Have you ever thought about doing a medium like this, podcasting or YouTube channel or something like that?
I have. And the problem is I already have such a, I'm perpetually fighting this war of like motivation and productivity to get like just screenwriting done, screenwriting of my own projects that I'm not, that aren't on deadline yet. That something like this, I would love it, and I would use it as such an excuse to not do that.
That's fair.
Like in a world where I had like the Harry Potter time turner thing, and I could like live each day 3 times. Oh my God, I would love it. I absolutely love just all of the like. Okay, I heard this. It was on another podcast. It was on Huberman Lab, which
with
is
Andrew Huberman. Yeah.
Yes, phenomenal podcast.
Yeah.
He had on Matt Walker talking about sleep.
Yeah,
and some topic came up that was just too big, and Matt Walker said we should have an intellectual jazz session about that. And I was like, that phrase, like an intellectual jazz session of just like people talking, just let's banter around. Anyway, I absolutely love it. So huge kudos for you for putting it together and for turning it into what it is. 32 episodes now. It's amazing. So
I appreciate it.
Congratulations.
Our primary goal is 100 episodes and then see what happens. But going back to your quality and quantity, I'm hoping that we keep putting out quality as we, keep putting out these episodes.
I don't doubt it. I think 100 is a very smart, reasonable goal. You're a third of the way there already, which is amazing.
Yeah.
I think you're going to blow well past that. So I'm flattered to have been a part at this early step.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
How do you do?
Thank you so much for watching this episode of the Last Zebra Podcast. As always, please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment. We have new episodes on all of your podcast platforms and on YouTube coming out every Tuesday morning. And I'm looking forward to seeing you guys on the next one.